All right, week 2, we're here and we're going to talk about a really sneaky good game this week in the SEC. One of those unspoken rivalries, Kentucky versus South Carolina. I've got my man Nick Roush from KSR.com live with me. And before we get started, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Nick, what's going on, big dog?
Man, it's a pleasure being on the 5-Star Flex. I'm fired up. It's week 2, and we already have an SEC matchup. Usually, it takes a little while to get a little runway, but like you said, these two programs that don't really like each other. So I'm fired up. SEC on ABC. I don't know what you think about the music, but I do like the graphics. The graphics look good, even if Florida didn't look good in week 1 on ABC.
I'll tell you what, I love the graphics. The music, I'll say, is growing on me because I'm associating it with SEC football. So I'm like, okay, I can go for that. And all right, so let's talk about the rivalry. Like you said, two teams that don't really like each other. Just dig into the rivalry a little bit and take us through it.
Well, the thing with it's probably like it's weird because like no team wants to say that the other one's a rival, but they treat each other as like rivals, and it's been that way for the last 10 years. It took a while for the Kentucky to get over that hump. Steve Spurrier just had their number. They finally beat him in 2010. And then when Mark Stoops arrived, his first big marquee win was against South Carolina in 2014. Huge come from behind. Bud Dupree gets a pick 6 to cap off the comeback. And that was really the first big marquee moment where you thought, okay, Mark Stoops, he can do this here. And I think a lot of the rivalry started with the coaches because at the time, Will Muschamp was at South Carolina.
Okay.
And Stoops would look at Muschamp and be like, why does everybody like him, but they don't like me? I mean, we're the same coach, right? Like I was at Jimbo at Florida State. Muschamp was at Texas at the time, but we have similar careers, but everybody likes him. And I'm doing more with less over here. So I think that's where it kind of got started. And then really there was a lot of close games back and forth. And then Kentucky, they just kept winning them. And South Carolina, after going off the Spurrier era, was like, all right, listen, we won 10 games in the SEC. We can't be losing to Kentucky. They got that Kentucky complex about them. Well, Cats rolled off 7 out of 8. Then Shane Beamer rolls to town. And Shane Beamer, he reads all of his press clippings. He's probably reading this right now. He loves reading his press clippings. And he saw Mark Stoops say that changing a culture, climate's one thing. You can put on sunglasses, and do a doofy dance, and everything's fine. But changing the culture, that's hard. Shane Beamer, he took that personally. And when Will Levis got injured and Kentucky had to play a backup quarterback, they ran a trick play on the first play. It blew up in their face, and South Carolina led the rest of the game. He got to put on his goofy sunglasses and dance. Now he's won back-to-back games. They're recruiting against each other more often. So it's probably going to be the permanent annual rivalry game when they go to 9 games, Dukes, but they won't say it's a rivalry. And Stoops, he will not give Shane Beamer any kibble to nibble on this week. He's not going to let him turn any of this into rivalry talk. He loves the sort of – he loves to take the bulletin board material and run with it. But from a recruiting perspective, which is what this show's about, there's been some big head-to-head battles before. And there's one coming up this weekend. The guy you're going to see is the number 2 receiver for Kentucky, Dane Key.
Okay.
He was in the locker room at South Carolina on his official visit. They were probably his second school. That was when Kentucky went down there and beat him. And then Vince Marrow FaceTimed Dane from the Kentucky locker room. And he said, you want to be in this locker room or that one? And now Dane's at Kentucky. Another head-to-head battle last year. That was a 4-star kind of – that was a high-profile recruitment. He's from Lexington. He's a legacy recruit. I hadn't heard of Quaysheed Scott when he committed on 4th of July. I was like, they're taking this guy. Who is that? Well, he ended up being a top 500 4-star guy that Kentucky really had to hold on to down the stretch. As you know, for South Carolina to recruit well, they got to beat Georgia and Clemson for guys in that Georgia kind of South Carolina area. Kentucky's coming in there. They're picking off some guys here and there, and that's adding even more fuel to this rivalry fire.
All right, so speaking of recruiting, this is going to be a big game, and we know these guys recruit against each other. Who are some recruits that'll be on the Kentucky sideline that people should be looking for in this game?
Well, a lot of commits will be in as they were last Saturday. It's funny though because they had to kind of sit around and wait for the lightning to die down. They had to deal with that whole shebang. But the biggest name that KSR can confirm will be on campus is four-star tight end Michael Skinner, who is committed to Cincinnati, has been committed to Cincinnati for a while. Kentucky, they don't need a ton of tight ends in this class, but they need one at least.
Mm-hmm.
And they had their sights set on Brody Lennon, who they had an inside track with. They really liked the way he was evaluated. They got on him early. Then he came to Ohio State, and he was awesome. He balled out. He got the offer. The Cleveland kid isn't going to turn that down. If you notice, too, I believe Charles Powell in the 1-3 team bumped him up. Like everybody else still has him like outside the top 500, and he's a top 200 guy for us. Mm-hmm. So Kentucky can't beat Ohio State for him. So they got to regroup, reevaluate, and Vince Marrow finds Skinner, who's from the state of South Carolina. He kind of hadn't had a ton of attention when he did commit to Scott Satterfield in Cincinnati. But once Vince got his sights on him, he offered him. I think South Carolina offered within a week or two of Kentucky. He visited South Carolina last weekend. Now he's officially visiting Kentucky this weekend. Dukes, I like Kentucky's track record when going up against Scott Satterfield guys. Jason Patterson, the running back for Kentucky, he's the first true freshman to tote the rock since Benny Snell in 2016, who all-time leading rusher. He was a Cincinnati commit. They flipped him at the last minute. I've submitted an RPM prediction for Kentucky to ultimately land Skinner and pull off this win and over Cincinnati and South Carolina, and it could start this Saturday night.
Oh, wow. All right, so there's a little segment that I like to do on this show called Hired Gun, and this is where you become the recruiter for the team that you cover. So right now, after game one, you're the hired recruiting gun.
Okay.
What are you selling to the recruits after game one in Kentucky, the win they had over Southern Miss?
I can promise you that you won't have to wait 2 hours for every game to start. The lightning delay, it was a one-off. But here's the thing about what we've built at Kentucky and what we're continuing to build, because Mark Stoops, he's been in the SEC longer than any other coach. And I know there's some other stuff out there, but Mark Stoops, he is committed to Kentucky. He is Mr. Kentucky. He's got more wins than any other coach in Kentucky football history, and he's not going anywhere. He's done things that have never been done before here, and you can help us do even more because we've had some of those pops, right? We've had guys rise up. We've had 2 10-win seasons in a 4-year span. Another one gets us into the college football playoff. You can be a part of making history, and not only that, you can have success here, and then you can go on to succeed in the NFL. Maxwell Harrison, Deion Walker, those guys are going to be first-round picks next year. We've had, if you're a cornerback, there's been a secondary member drafted in the last 4 years. There's been quarterbacks drafted in each of the last 2 years. We're going to help your dreams come true. It's really tough in the SEC, but you know what? If you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. Help us beat the man and take this to the next level in the best conference in all of college football.
Bro, I am sold, man. Hey, hey, I need a blue hat. I need a jersey. Sign me up, baby. All right. So speaking of high-profile guys, Martel Carter Jr. is somebody who's been committed to Kentucky for a while, but I'm starting to hear that Auburn is starting to creep back in the picture. What does Kentucky have to do to hold on to a guy like Carter, who I think is the number 1 or number 2 player in the state?
Martel Carter is one of those guys that when Kentucky pushed in all in early, and they very well knew that this was not going to be a quick battle because, if I'm not mistaken, Auburn's lead recruiter in that also recruited him at Colorado. He's a big Martel Carter fan. But I think in this case, they know that they're going to have to go down to the wire. I believe they got him on campus last weekend, and I think the plan is for a return trip. The thing, too, Kentucky's actually held their own pretty well against Auburn in recent years. I know Hugh Freeze is a different story, but Jacoby Albert was a 4-star kid that they flipped late. Auburn really wanted Devin Leary from the transfer portal.
Yes,
so there's been a lot of sort of head-to-heads as of late. And I say a lot, but about one a year where they're both in on a guy, and it's either neither or Kentucky kind of comes out ahead. Carmelo English, who ended up in Michigan, he was another one of those kids. So a lot of, I think, what is going to come down to it, I don't think it's the head-to-head matchup as much as proximity is going to play a big role here, particularly in the NIL realm where you look at a guy like I mentioned earlier with Dane Key, being a home state guy, being a kid who's played his high school football in Paducah, that pops a lot more in the nil front. ultimately, I think that sell is going to help put them over the top. And if you look at the Kentucky defense this year, they're going to be pretty good, and they're going to have some guys drafted. So I think that track record with the freshmen that they've been playing will ultimately be enough. But I'm not willing to say that it's not going to be a fight, and we're going to be sitting here right back here before signing day talking about this, Dukes.
All right, so now we got to go to our next segment. Nick Stradamus, tell me how the game is going to go and give me a prediction.
The thing about Kentucky, South Carolina, Mark Stoops pointed out, they've been a lot of close games. And usually Kentucky, they don't play well. They've committed a ton of turnovers in recent years. And for South Carolina to have a chance, they have to do that. I mean, they had to do that to beat Old Dominion. Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard, they forced 4 fumbles between the two of them. Like, you have to force turnovers if you want a chance to win. And I just don't see Kentucky doing that unless there's some bad fumble luck or something like that. Brock Vandegrift, he plays within himself. He's good at ad-libbing, but he's not going to try to do too much. I'm a little worried about how South Carolina is going to be able to put pressure on Vandegrift. But I just don't know how South Carolina scores points in this football game, because they had to labor to get there last Saturday. 2 of them were in goal-to-goal situations where they forced turnovers, and they're just right on the end zone's doorstep. Lenore Sellers, he's going to be a good football player eventually, but he doesn't have a lot of talent around him to throw the football to. So it's really up to him and Rocket Sanders to do it all. And what does Kentucky do best? They stop the run. They've got big Deion Walker in there. Keyshawn Silver, Trayvon Ripka had a solid debut. He's a former high 3-star from Tennessee. Like, they have a ton of experience in the trenches, and they're linebackers. I think we were short selling how good the linebackers were, because De'Aaron Jackson was one of the best run stoppers in the SEC. They went and got another great one in Jamon Dumas-Johnson. He picks off a pass in his second play as a Kentucky Wildcat. He's flashy. He's sudden. And then even the guys behind him, Dave Rayner had a great pass breakup on 3rd down, and Alex Afari had a couple of tackles for us and only 10 snaps. So South Carolina is not going to be able to run the ball. They can't really throw it. It might be a slobber knocker under that you have to take, because there's still some questions Kentucky offense need to answer. But I think Kentucky wins, and I think they win big. I think it's something along the lines of like 31-7, 28-10. This is going to be a big win for Kentucky, a statement win that ultimately gets College Game Day in Lexington for the number 1 ranked showdown against Georgia the following Saturday.
Nick Roush, awesome stuff, my man. Where can everybody find you and what you do on KSR?
Roush KSR is the handle on X/Twitter. X going give it to you. And KentuckySportsRadio.com KS board is the message where we're sharing lots of intel, lots of insight on Kentucky football recruiting. Appreciate you liking, subscribing, everything, and following along for this fun journey that is the 2024 college football season.
Man, I love it. Hey, we'll see you. Definitely got to get you back on before the Georgia game.
Oh, sign me up. Sign me up, Dukes. Let's do it.
All right, say no more, man. Thanks a lot, bro.